or separatism and to undermine national unification. Now, there's a human rights report called Illegal Organisations, which is in the original filing, Part 3, Section B, the expert section, and that statement appears at page 241. This court will hear from witnesses who were prisoners of conscience, who will give evidence that they were charged with these types of crimes. Now, in terms of politicising religion, this is demonstrated when Xi Jinping chaired the National Conference on Work Related to Religious Affairs in Beijing over the 3rd to 4th of December 2021. This appears in the International Campaign for Tibet report at page 5. In 2007, the CCP issued an order which is titled Management Measures for the Reincarnation of Living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism. And this initiative seeks to take control over the Dalai Lama's reincarnation to undermine the authority of legitimate Tibetan religious leaders. That can be found on page 5 of the same report. In January 2016, Xi Jinping's administration launched an online database of CCP-approved Tibetan Buddhist reincarnations and officially designated as authentic living Buddhas of Tibetan Buddhism the names and descriptions of 870 such individuals. The Dalai Lama is not included in this database. Again, that's the International Campaign for Tibet report, page 5. Now, Xi Jinping's Tibetan people means to make them Chinese. His objective is to assimilate an entire Tibetan youth demographic to create a new generation of Sinified Tibetans, identifying themselves with Chinese loyalty to the nation and to the CCP. As part of this strategy, Tibetan schools have become a forum to strictly enforce Chinese as the primary language of education over the Tibetan language. In 2015, the State Council issued a decision on accelerating the development of ethnic education, in which the central government of China called to strengthen boarding school construction in the minority areas and to achieve the goal that students of all ethnic minorities will study in a school, live in a school, and grow up in a school. That's at the document at NFE number 2, pages 22 to 46. I will be calling expert witness Sophie Richardson, who worked as the China Director of Human Rights Watch over the period 2006 to 2023, as well as expert witness Darden Sharling, who was a former member of the Tibetan Central Administration, who will give evidence corroborating the conclusions made in the report from the International Campaign for Tibet. Now, it's important, I think, to set out a chronology of human rights abuses prior to and leading up to the presidency of Xi Jinping. 2008 was a historic year for Tibetan independence and human rights. This was the year that Xi Jinping became vice president in the People's Republic of China. That occurred in March 2008. With the 2008 Beijing Olympics to take world stage on the 8th of August 2008, a mass of civil unrest and protests broke out in Tibet to highlight the serious human rights abuses experienced by the civilian population there. The Human Rights Report in the original filing, Part 3, Section B, starting at page 236, called Illegal Organisations, sets out that all foreign NGOs in Tibet were shut down after mass protests against the government in March 2008. And given the scale of the protest, and with the world attention on Tibet at the time, it can only be inferred that Xi Jinping, in his capacity as Vice President of the PRC, had knowledge about the discontent amongst Tibetans as to their treatment under Chinese rule, and further, that in that capacity, he had an active role in the brutal response of the Chinese authorities to the civil unrest. On the 14th of March 2008, Chinese armed forces fired live ammunition into a Tibetan protest, killing around 80 Tibetans. This is referred to in the book produced by expert Darden Sharling, She was part of the Tibetan Central Administration and co-authored and edited this book. The book is called Tibet Was Never a Part of China, but the Middle Way is a Viable Approach. And the book, it was really a response from the Tibetan Central Administration to a number of white papers on ethnic policy that was being produced by China at the time. You will hear from victim and activist Mr. Jigme Golok, who is a Tibetan Buddhist monk who led the protest at Lodrong Monastery on the 15th of March 2008. He will tell you that his activism led to his arrest, his detention, and his brutal torture before he managed to escape from custody. Whilst on the run, he scraped to survive in the Tibetan mountains with a serious leg injury, surviving the cold and without adequate food. He fled out of Tibet and has since been recognised by the Swiss government as a refugee. And his survival of this endeavour is the only reason that he's able to come to court in person to give his testimony about his monkhood, his activism, his treatment by the Chinese, and how he came to survive it all. Mr. Jigme Golok, together with victim and activist Mr. Dondup Wanchen, made the film called Leaving Fear Behind. They travelled extensively throughout Tibet to interview ordinary Tibetans about their living experiences under Chinese occupation. Both men were also involved with publishing and distributing books about Tibetan culture and history. And you'll hear that this activism led both men to becoming political prisoners of conscience. The film itself is on the case file as there are some videos. This film is a short film. It's 24 minutes long, and it's also available online. I don't expect to necessarily show the film to the court, particularly because Mr. Dondup Wanchen is going to be giving evidence on Zoom, and the film really is for the purposes of showing the reason that he came to be arrested, detained, tortured, and ultimately charged with separatism type offences and then imprisoned. Now, he was also charged with spreading state secrets as a result of making this film. You'll hear from Mr. Dondup Wanchen that the film was smuggled out of Tibet and that he saw it for the very first time when he was in prison. And that was precisely because it was the sole piece of evidence that the Chinese state used in their case against him. Without any due process, he was then sentenced to over 6 years in prison and served his sentence under severe hardship of enforced manual labour. He was also re-educated, and you will hear that as a political prisoner, he was treated differently from the other prisoners, because in addition to the enforced labour, he was also required to report his innermost thoughts and feelings to the Chinese authorities on a daily basis and to reflect on his purported inadequacies in order to be re-educated and to reform. Both men will speak about the Chinese state monitoring them following their incarceration. These are matters which go to the crime against humanity of imprisonment and persecution. In Dondup Wanchen's case, following his release in 2014, and noting now that this is the period of Xi Jinping's presidency, he was made to report his movements and whereabouts to the authorities regularly. He was prohibited from travelling without permission. He was closely monitored with visits from authorities at 4 different hierarchical levels, and his family and associates were also watched and monitored. In Jigme Golok's case, you'll hear that he was followed and monitored even after he had escaped from Tibet. He will speak about the extent of restrictions of information from inside Tibet to the outside world, which impeded upon his own communications with his brother and also resulted in his own brother being arrested and interrogated. And again, these are matters that go to the crime against humanity of political persecution. Both men also addressed that when Xi Jinping came to power, the number of youth joining monasteries to receive their traditional education was significantly reduced, resulting in a reduction in the preservation of Tibetan linguistic and religious identity. And again, this goes to religious persecution. There's another witness, Ms. Nima Lamo, who will also give evidence about the fate of her late uncle, named Tenzin Delek Rinpoche, who was a revered spiritual leader within Tibet, having been conferred by the Dalai Lama the status of being a Lama. You'll hear about the Chinese government monitoring him, and that without a fair trial, he was charged and convicted of terrorism and inciting separatism. He was then sentenced to death, but 2 years later, it was reduced to life imprisonment. Now, Tenzin Delek Rinpoche was imprisoned for 13 years before he died in custody in July 2015 under very suspicious circumstances. You'll hear from Nima Lamo that her family never did see him alive. She will recount her attempts to uncover the cause of her uncle's death in custody, which led to herself and her mother being arrested. They were detained for sharing photos and information about her uncle with others. And you will hear from her that in order for her to be released, she was told to sign a document in which she would agree to, firstly, not allege that her uncle was poisoned in custody, secondly, not to share any information about her uncle with any others, and thirdly, not to associate with or meet others in any gathering to discuss her uncle. Similarly to Domdap Wanchen and Jigme Golik, Nima Lamo will also recount the close surveillance that she and her family came under from the authorities following her and her mother's release from custody and the difficult circumstances that then resulted in her leaving Tibet. She will be giving evidence in a place at the United States, having fled. I will need to somewhat meticulously go through various of Xi Jinping's speeches at various important forums to establish a linkage between what happened to the Tibetan population on the ground with his knowledge and intention in relation to the crimes alleged in counts 2 to 4. The evidence on the case file includes media reporting of Xi Jinping's visits to Tibet and his various speeches and keynote addresses at important congressional conferences about Tibetan ethnic affairs. This covers the period over 2011 and 2021. It's alleged that these speeches evince his state of mind, namely his knowledge and his intent for each of the attacks against the Tibetan civilian population. During his speech at the 2011 visit to Tibet as Vice President of the PRC, he said, and I quote, "We should fight against separatist activities by the Dalai group. We should rely on pages and people of all ethnic groups, seek long-term policies and take measures that address the root cause and to completely destroy attempt to undermine stability in Tibet and national unity of the land." Now, this appears in the original filing, Part 3, State Media, at pages 5 to 8. In his speech in the 2015 Central Tibet Work Symposium, which took place over the 24th to 25th of August 2015, and this is now 3 years into his presidency, he states, "All aspects of Tibet work must be planned and integrated to firmly grasp the initiative in the anti-succession struggle." Now, I'm quoting from the documents that the defence had provided on the case file. And in particular, this document is the one titled, "What Were Discussed at the 6th Central Tibet Work Symposiums." In this speech, highlighting the great importance that the Party Central Committee attaches to Tibet work, he outlined his strategic policies for Tibet, clarifying the guiding ideology, objectives, requirements, and measures for what he thought needed to be done in Tibet. And he couched it as promoting economic and social development and long-term peace and stability. Importantly, Xi Jinping laid down the 6 musts, which are: 1, to uphold the leadership of the Communist Party of China; 2, that governing the country must govern the borders and the borders must first stabilise Tibet; 3, to adhere to the important principles of governing Tibet according to law; D, to fully and correctly implement the party's ethnic policy and religious policy, recognise the people of all ethnic groups to the great motherland, the Chinese nation, Chinese culture, and the Communist Party of China, and socialism with Chinese characteristics. 5, to do a good job in Tibet while coordinating the overall domestic and international situations. And 6, to strengthen the construction of party organisations and cadres at all levels to consolidate the party's ruling foundation in Tibet. Now, his speeches across multiple forums consistently emphasise, and I quote, "We must unswervingly carry out the anti-succession struggle and ensure national security and long-term stability." Another thing under the Chinese Communist Party and under the leadership of Xi Jinping is the use of law itself to discriminate and to persecute. In his speeches, Xi Jinping reiterates that, and I quote, "Governing Tibet according to law means safeguarding the authority of the Constitution and the laws upholding the principle that everyone is equal before the law." However, the evidence suggests that in Tibet, the law itself is utilised as an instrument of oppression. Xi Jinping, in his 2019 speech at the National Conference on Commending National Unity and Progress, propagated a conflation of religion and terrorism and was directed at criminalising religion. He stated that there is a need, and I quote, "to strictly guard against and resolutely crack down on all kinds of infiltration, subversion and sabotage activities, violent terrorist activities, ethnic separatist activities, and religious extremists on the case file." And this is the document titled Speech at National Conference on Commending National Unity and Progress. Indeed, under Xi Jinping, the law was used to criminalise a range of traditional and social activities, in that public notices and guidelines were issued with discriminatory effect upon Tibetans. These laws or legal processes include the 26th of May 2016 law, which was the Regulation on Registration and Management of Social Service Organisations, which was led by the Ministry of Civil Affairs Policy and Regulation Department, requiring all social organisations to, and I quote, "uphold national unity, security or ethnic unity, as well as other criteria." Now, the laws that I'm going to be taking the court through are cited from the Human Rights Report, Illegal Organisations, which is in the original filing, Part 3, Section B, and at various page numbers. That one was 240. Now, the laws that have been passed since 2016 require all social organisations to register with the authorities, and organisations that have applied for registration and have been rejected are deemed illegal. Then, in January 2018, as CCP General Secretary, Xi Jinping made a nationwide call to attack major forms of what he called organised crime and mafia-like gangs. On the 11th of January 2018, the CCP Central Committee and State Council issued a document called Notice on Carrying Out a Special Crackdown on Clearing Away Organised Crime and Eliminating Vice. And that notice required a crackdown on gangs and organised crimes. It was a major feature of the 2018 work plans of the Ministry of Public Security and the Ministry of Justice, as well as the Supreme Courts. This document appears in the original filing, Part 3, Section D, Other Media at page 1. And that quote comes from a Xinhua News article called China Focus, Fight Against Organised Crime Reflects Xi's Governance Thought. I think that is a document that the defence also rely upon. Now, in response to Xi Jinping's national call in February 2018, China's Public Security Bureau in the Tibet Autonomous Region issued another notice urging the public to inform on underworld forces and declaring various traditional or informal social activities amongst the Tibetan civilian population to be illegal. These activities included language preservation, environmental protection, and dispute mediation. And again, that appears in the Human Rights Watch report called Illegal organisations at page 230. Human Rights Watch reports that this is the first time such activities and opinions have been officially listed as crimes by a provincial level body in Tibet. Now, there's a notice of the Tibet Autonomous Region Public Security Department on reporting leads on crime and violations by the underworld forces, which is in the original filing at Section D, Other Media, from pages 55 to 58. This notice states, underworld forces are a malignant cancer of a healthy economic and social development. The broad masses of the people are asked to enthusiastically report leads on cases of violations or crimes by underworld forces. The notice itself sets out 22 types of underworld forces that need to be reported, and then provides information about how one can report these various activities to the authorities. I will now go through the prohibited activities that discriminate Tibetans under this notice. And the discrimination comes by depriving the population of their fundamental human rights, by denying them rights and freedoms to basically conduct their everyday, ordinary, traditional, social and religious practices. Any of these activities could fall into a variety of these headings of what constitutes an underworld force. Number one, underworld forces that threaten political security, especially regime security and institutional security, as well as those penetrating political sphere. Number two, underworld forces interconnected with the Dalai clique, accepting participating in separatist. We do have an expert witness called Lagari Namjal Dolka, who will be questioned about the term Dalai clique and what it means and why it is used. But going back to the list, number three, underworld forces with temples as patrons, using religion to control, to confuse, to incite, or to coerce the masses to resist the party and government, or interfering in local level administration, judicial or educational or other affairs. Number four, underworld forces with close relations and interconnections to all kinds of illegal organisation, instilling the masses with reactionary ideology and narrow nationalism, such as the Middle Way, and protecting the mother tongue. Now, it's commonly known that the Middle Way, or at least it will be presented in evidence by the experts, that the Middle Way is a philosophy taken under Tibetan Buddhism. And protecting the mother tongue really means advocating to keep the Tibetan language as a teaching medium. The evidence on the papers shows that an activist named Tashi Wunchok was imprisoned after giving an interview to the New York Times, where he advocated to have as a teaching medium the Tibetan language in Tibetan schools. Back to the notice, number five is underworld forces holding themselves out as so-called spokespersons for the masses under such banners as economics, the people's livelihood, environmental protection, folk customs and culture, that are in fact spokespersons for the Dalai clique and hostile foreign non-mainland forces. Number six, underworld forces illegally soliciting donations, fundraising, giving out fines, taking compulsory collection from the people, or seizing opportunities for unjust enrichment and providing funds to the Dalai clique. Number 10, underworld forces that exploit religion or family forces to illegally meddle and intervene in conflicts and disputes amongst the people, such as over boundaries, pastures, caterpillar fungus, debts, and to act as underground law enforcement teams, meddling and intervening in the local level administration and judiciary. Now, this one is actually directed at religious leaders who serve as mediators to local level civil disputes. Number 16 is underworld forces meddling in civil disputes. Number 17 is underworld forces organising the employment of online paid trolls or commentators to threaten, intimidate, berate, defame or make trouble. And this one, it's alleged, targets internet users and those who share information with the outside world. Number 18, underworld forces who connect online through WeChat groups and online forums, or other means to carry out illegal or criminal activities offline. And then number 22 states other leads as to crimes involving organised crime and vice. The application of these laws and guidelines was both widespread and systematic, and severely adversely affected ordinary Tibetans going out their everyday lives. Xi Jinping's politicisation of religion and his assimilationist agenda is made clearer in his speech on the 10 musts at the 7th Tibet Work Forum in August 2020. Here, in addition to the 6 musts that I referred to from the earlier work forum, he added a more assimilationist agenda, which included maintaining the unity of the motherland and strengthening national unity must be the focus of our work in Tibet, and adhere to the direction of Sinicization of religion in our country and manage religious affairs according to law. Now, his speech at the National Conference on Commendation of National Unity and Progress on the 27th of September 2019 stated, "Over the past 7 years, I've visited ethnic areas for research more than a dozen times, and in terms of his ethnic affairs policy in Tibet, he emphasised the recurring theme of, I'll quote, upholding the leadership of the party to unite and lead the people of all ethnic groups to firmly follow the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics." He then goes on, "We must plan the development of ethnic minorities and ethnic regions during the 14th five-year plan period so that people of all ethnic groups can create a better future and share the new glory and dream of the Chinese." Now, it's the prosecution case that Xi Jinping's ambition of the new glory and dream of the Chinese nation is, in fact, the agenda of Sinicization of all Tibetans, stripping them of their Tibetanness, their culture, religion, social and traditional norms, and assimilating them into the mainstream Han ways to create new generations of Tibetans who are Chinified, including speaking Chinese and adhering to party thinking. Expert witness Lagari Namgyal Dolka, who is a member of the Tibetan Central Administration, also known as the Tibetan Government in Exile, will give evidence that President Xi's Tibet policy involves real apprehensions about Tibetan identity, especially Tibetan socio-political identity based on Tibetan Buddhism, and further, that China seeks to reconstitute Tibet and Tibetans as an integrated part of Chinese identity. Expert witness Darden Sharling, who is a former member of the Tibetan Central Administration, will also give evidence about attacks on Tibetan cultural identity, and in particular, an institutional push under the leadership of Xi Jinping toward policies that further estrange young Tibetans from their heritage. For example, where boarding schools and labour camps are used strategically to detach Tibetan youth from their cultural roots, effectively taking away their Tibetanness and their identity. And her evidence will be that these institutions serve as tools for indoctrination, where the curriculum and environment are designed to suppress traditional Tibetan values and promote a narrative aligned with Chinese nationalism and socialism. Now, in 2021, Xi Jinping visited Tibet as the first president to actually visit the region. So this visit was actually historically very significant. There's evidence on the case file in form of news media, Xinhua, and international coverage by BBC, The Hindu, and Reuters that show that he was at the forefront of the CCP's policies concerning Tibetan ethnic and religious affairs, and that he was publicly calling for his and his party's overarching objectives to be followed and monitored and implemented within Tibet. 1 month later, in August 2021, after his visit to Tibet, he then addressed the Central Conference on Ethnic Affairs in Beijing, where he stressed, and I quote, "The CPC's leadership over ethnic work must be upheld." He also made a call to unswervingly take the correct approaches with Chinese characteristics to the handling of ethnic affairs. And during this address, he conflated ethnic affairs with national sovereignty and security, saying development interests must be resolutely safeguarded. He also said, only through fostering a strong sense of community for the Chinese nation and all ethnic groups jointly safeguarding national security and social stability can the infiltration and subversion of extremist and separatist thoughts be resisted and the aspiration of the people of all ethnic groups for a better life be fulfilled. He again emphasised the importance of the interests of the Chinese nation above anything else, and as a guiding principle for ethnic affairs, he cited, ethnic separatism and religious extremism should be continuously eliminated. Now, some of the language and terms and phraseology that Xi Jinping uses in these speeches may be examined via the expert witnesses during their evidence. Turning now to evidence of the forcible transfer of a civilian population, being the children separated from families and into Han-run boarding schools, there is a reliance on the prosecution case upon open source reports from reputable NGOs. One is the Human Rights Report of 2020 called China's Bilingual Education Policy in Tibet, Tibetan Medium Schooling Under Threat. This is in the original filing, Part 3, Section B, Expert Reports, pages 124 to 222. Another report is the 2021 report of the Tibet Action Institute called Separated from Their Families, Hidden from the World, China's Vast System of Colonial Boarding Schools Inside Tibet. And again, it's in the original filings, Part 3, Section B, pages 1 to 62. The Tibetan Institute for Action document reports approximately 800, being 78% of Tibetan students who were lawfully residing in the Tibet Autonomous Region in Qinghai, Sichuan, Gansu, and Yunnan were forcibly transferred into colonial boarding schools. Human Rights Watch reports that in 2014, the central authorities announced a new policy that emphasised assimilationist objectives for minorities, and that was followed by a major document issued by the Central Party Committee that appeared to call for the introduction of Model 2 bilingual education. In May 2014, President Xi formally endorsed the concept of ethnic mingling, and then at a September 2014 Central Authorities National Conference on Ethnic Work, he announced that overall ethnic policy would aim at promoting what he said, ethnic mingling and cultural identification with Chinese culture. Namely, he was calling for the identification by minority nationalities with the culture of the China race. And the word Zonghua Minzu is repeated. This appears in the expert reports, page 151, and also in reports done by Professor James Leibold, called Xinjiang Forum Marks a New Policy of Ethnic Mingling. In October 2014, the CCP Central Committee and State Council suggestions on strengthening and improving nationality work in the new situation was published. This is the name of the document. And Article 14 of this document sets out the requirement, I quote, to resolutely push forward education in the national language and text. It required officials to fully hold classes in the national language, fully popularise the national language, and ensure minority nationality students have a basic grasp and use of the national language and text. Xi Jinping then made a statement at the 2015 Central Tibet Work Symposium, which in the prosecution case is telling of his state of mind as to knowledge and intention for the charge of forcible transfer of children from their families, where he stated, I quote, "We must integrate the education of socialist core values into the curriculum of schools at all levels and types. We must promote the national common language and writing and strive to cultivate builders and successors of the socialist cause who love the party and the country." There are also a number of translated documents that appear on the case file. These are at NFE 2, which is Part 3, Section C, State Media, pages 2 to 46, which address the relevant CCP policies under Xi Jinping. And these documents include a 2020 State Council document called Opinion on Strengthening Language in the New Era, a 2017 CCP and State Council opinion on implementing the project to inherit and develop outstanding traditional culture in Zonghua, and then a 2015 document called the State Council Decision on Accelerating the Development of Nationalities Education. Now, this 2015 State Council decision ordered that full play should be given to the central role of the party committee leadership to ensure the correct development of ethnic education, and it also ordered that the party building must be strengthened in the educational system in minority areas as well as in individual schools. The document was issued by the State Council and called on officials to strengthen boarding school construction in minority areas to achieve the goal that all students of all ethnic minorities will study in a school, live in a school, and grow up in a school. Human Rights Watch reports that in 2015, the authorities in the Tibet Autonomous Region announced that it had basically completed the bulk of its mission of building a bilingual education system, and that 97% of Tibetan students in that region were receiving bilingual education. Now, by this time, Chinese was already being used as a language of instruction in primary schools, and there are more recent policies in the Tibet Autonomous Regions for school construction aiming at kindergartens to be in villages, primary schools to be in towns, junior middle schools to be in county towns, and senior middle schools to be in cities, which place practically children away from their families who live rurally. The reports also state that children enrolled in any of the schools within the Lhasa Education City are required to board, even if they're alleged that this practice is intended to diminish the cultural or linguistic influence of Tibetan families on their children during their home visits. There's a Global Times report from 2016, which reports that the Tibetan Autonomous Region government planned to ensure that by 2020, 80% of children in the Tibet Autonomous Region attend 2 to 3 years of kindergarten before entering primary school. Now, this, again, is a defence document that has been filed. It's a Global Times article called 250 Bilingual Kindergartens to be Built in the Tibetan Region. Now, in March 2017 and then in March 2018, President Xi stated that Chinese nationalities should cluster together as tightly as pomegranate seeds, again, demonstrating his assimilationist and signification agendas. His party policies on education have included: 1, combining Chinese language study with ethnic mingling policies; 2, relocating mainland Chinese teachers to minority areas, and then sending a similar number of local teachers to the mainland China, and having mixed classes and concentrated schooling. The evidence reports that Tibetan boarding school students experience emotional and psychological distress as a result of being separated from their families, their communities, their cultures, and that includes isolation and loneliness. The ICC statute defines forcibly as being not restricted to physical force and may include threat or force of coercion, such as that caused by fear or violence, duress, detention, psychological oppression, or abuse of power against a person by taking advantage of a coercive environment. Now, the prosecution case is that whilst there may not have been guns held to heads, the forcible nature of the separation of children from families did occur in some cases, and in other cases there was intimidation, there were threats used by authorities to coerce parents who were reluctant. In other cases, there was threat of force or coercion, such as duress, and by taking advantage of a coercive environment where Tibetan parents, in fact, lacked any other alternative options for schooling. When Dondap Wanchen gives his evidence, you will hear his own experiences of the boarding school phenomenon, in that his own nephews and nieces were separated from their parents to attend preschools and boarding schools, had to learn everything in the Chinese language, and had to let go of the Tibetan language. His evidence is that under Xi Jinping, private language schools and learning programs carried out by individuals at a local level were banned. His evidence will be that religious identity is prohibited and damaged, and linguistically, Tibetans don't have access to learning their own language, and other aspects of their identity were strictly limited. You'll hear Dondap Wanchen tell you that no family is willing to be separated from their children, and that the parents of his nieces and nephews did not want their kids to go to school, but they really had no choice, because if they did not agree, then they faced serious consequences. And as a result, parents will usually compromise. Now, these serious consequences that could be faced for refusal could be, for example, the government cutting any social welfare programs that the family is receiving, which could be food or money. If you're a farmer, there may be a reduction in the size of your plantation, making it harder to work. And you could also be placed on a blacklist, resulting in all manner of administrative troubles. For example, the government could reject your application for a driver's license or refuse to admit a talented child into a reputable college. It's the prosecution case that the offence was committed as part of a deliberate policy of separating children from their families and eradicating their Tibetan cultural identity. In terms of evidence in support of the charge of imprisonment and persecution, the prosecution case is that Xi Jinping, together with Chen Guangguo and others, detained or imprisoned a large number of the Tibetan people as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed at that population. The offence was committed through the banning of social groups and associations via notices and guidelines that were issued by the authorities. These are all set out in the human rights report called Illegal Organisation. A notice in Chamdo within the Tibetan Autonomous Region in 2014, and another notice in Malho, Qinghai Province in 2015. The Malho notice bans organising illegal groups and public demonstrations in the name of language rights, and the Chamgo notice goes one step further, declaring the promotion of even vegetarianism, which is a Buddhist practice, to be a criminal offence. This was followed by public calls by President Xi on the 11th of January 2018 for authorities to carry out a special crackdown on gangs and organised crime. And on the 7th of February 2018, that resulted in the issue of a notice of the Tibet Autonomous Region Public Security Department on reporting leads on crime and violations of underworld forces. Now, I've spoken already about that notice and the scope of activities that fall under the term underworld forces. These actions resulted in the imprisonment and detention of Tibetans in violation of not just fundamental rules of international law that are universally recognised, such as the various human rights treaties or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but they also actually violate China's own domestic laws, including its own constitution. The offence, we say, was committed as part of the Chinese Communist Party's tight-knit control over Tibetan ethnic, cultural and religious practices and activities, including as a measure to prohibit and prevent support for the exiled Dalai Lama, which was a movement considered by the party to be encouraging separatism in Tibet. In support of the charges of crimes against humanity concerning imprisonment and persecution, the Human Rights Report, Illegal Organisation, China's crackdown on social groups is relied on. And again, Dr. Sophie Richardson will be called upon to establish that the contents of the human rights reports were meticulously researched by qualified teams of researchers who conducted their research methodically and over years, and such that Your Honours can be satisfied that the contents of those reports are accurate and reliable. The three fact witnesses, victims, Dondap Wanchen, Jigme Golok and Nima Lamo, speak to their own experiences of the deprivations of human rights to religion, associating with religious figures, disseminating information concerning Tibetan or religious matters, and all three witnesses give their own accounts about their experiences of arbitrary imprisonment and intensive surveillance and monitoring by the Chinese authorities post-custody. Now, finally, I want to talk about self-immolation as a desperate form of protest. This phenomenon is addressed in depth in Chapter 1 of the book called The the book, which is the Tibetan Central Government's response to those China white papers, which is produced by expert witness Daron Sharling. This is NFE 4, Part 3, Section D, pages 66 to 96. There was a rise in the number of recorded Tibetan self-immolations in 2012, and this was during the time of Xi Jinping's transition into presidency. In the record 84 cases that year, 23 of these self-immolations took place in the last 1.5 years after Xi Jinping took over. The two experts who I will be calling, Lagari Namgyal Dolkar and Daron Sharling, will address this drastic and tragic phenomenon, including why self-immolation became prevalent during Xi Jinping's presidency. Ordinary means of protest, such as street demonstrations, after all, would inevitably result in arbitrary detention, torture, imprisonment, and ongoing adverse consequences for the families and associates of the protester who's left behind, even long after the person is released from prison. In December 2012, there were new guidelines issued where Tibetans could be sentenced on homicide charges based on their alleged intent and presumed ability to influence a self-immolator. And this is issued on the State Supreme Court and Prosecution Service's opinion on handling self-immolation cases in the Tibetan areas in accordance with law. These laws only operate to further persecute the civilian Tibetan population. And at the end of all of this evidence, the prosecution will submit that there are substantial grounds to believe that the 3 crimes against humanity charged in counts 2 Jinping's intent and knowledge, and accordingly that these charges should be confirmed for trial. Now, that concludes my opening for the Tibetan case, and I am now ready to call on the first witness, Donda Wanchen, who will be appearing by Zoom.
Opportunity to speak.
Sorry?
Do we get an opportunity?
Yes, we do. The defense, I'm not sure whether you want to respond or not at this stage.
I'm reserving my opening to the beginning of the defense case, as we've done previously, Your Honor. And I look forward to finishing the prosecution's case in late August.
We think perhaps early July.
All right. No, actually, Australians work much faster than that. All right. Okay. Anyway, I'm ready with the next witness straight away.
Yes, Your Honour. Perhaps if I can just, I see that Mr. Donda Wanchen appears to be on the screen, or at least his name is on the screen, so it may be that he's entered into the meeting. We do have an interpreter in the Tibetan Amdo language who will be assisting Mr. Donda Wanchen, and his name is Mr. Danzing Thompson, who is the gentleman standing up, Your Honour. Perhaps Mr. Thompson can take the chair here.
So I'm going to have documents, the statements of each of the witnesses. What we have at the moment are very large files which have the evidence of all the witnesses one after the other. And it's very difficult. So what happens in relation to the aggression case is that the prosecution very happily split up into smaller files, with each witness having a file. Is that possible for you to do?
Yes, Your Honour. I can certainly indicate that all of Donda Wanchen's documents were filed within one section. It's a small bundle of documents, and this appears at NFE 2, Section A, titled Witness, and constitutes pages 43 to 66. Those are all the materials that were filed in relation to Donda Wanchen. I'll break it down, Your Honour. So there were notes from a conference with Mr. Wanchen on the 14th of June 2024, which appear at NFE 2, pages 43 to 48. Then there's his testimony from the Congressional Executive Commission on China on the 14th of February 2018.
Give us the details as each witness testifies. Don't
Yes.
give us the list now.
But this is for this witness, I
This,
think.
this witness is
Yeah,
going to
this is for this
testify now.
witness, right.
Yes, Your Honour. So there's another article from Filming for Tibet called Tibetan Video Activist Dondup Wanchen Arrives in USA to Safety, dated the 27th of December 2017, and that is in the same NFE bundle number 2, pages 55 to 57. And then there's a speech that he gave at the Geneva Summit in 2019 at NFE 2, pages 58 to 62. An article called 2012 CPJ International Press Freedom Awardee at the same NFE 2, pages 63 to 66. And in this case, there has also been the documentary film, Leaving Fear Behind, which is in NFE 2, section E on videos. Now, that film, Your Honour, is 24 minutes, and I don't propose to play it, although,
Could I just inquire, are there any witnesses who are going to be testifying in the room now? I don't think so, I'm just asking. No,
no, there is not in the Tibet case.
okay, thank you.
So, Your Honours, I'm ready to proceed. May I have the interpreter, Mr. Danzing Thompson, take the chair here, Your Honour?
Sorry?
We have an interpreter in court.
Okay.
Which the interpreter will take we have a
Right,
witness
okay.
on video in front of us. We have the interpreter taking the
Check.
witness
Right,
box.
okay.
And
That's fine.
All right.
Is this witness testifying in their own name?
Yes, he is, Your Honour.
And do we have a waiver?
Yes, he has signed a waiver, and that has been provided to my learned friends.
Judge Webb,
Yes, I just want,
we have waivers from all witnesses.
you do have waivers, so
For
that's
Tibet, yes.
reflective. Very good.
Does Your Honour wish to swear in the interpreter?
Yes, indeed. And to make sure we do this correctly with interpretation, first of all, let me ask the witness to state his name.
당부 들어오지마.
There's an echo.
제 소속의 민대 모르지다스.
So he answered without interpretation for his name, correct? Okay. Witness, at this point, I wish to ask you, do you affirm that everything that you will testify to here will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
कुछ रोगन चला अनि चे तावी ठुमखाम दिन अनि कजे गांग से बदी अनि तंपत दंजान तंबो टांसा जुमा चिजिन शेगी इंसे अगर अनि तंजा जातु ग्रवेस. Yes, of course, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. You may proceed, Counsel.
Yes. Does Your Honour wish to swear in the interpreter?
Well, we'll do an interpreter's oath. Interpreter, do you affirm that you will interpret the exact words of the accused and the meaning of those words to the best of your ability?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Mr. Dondup Wanchen, when and where were you born?
कुछ तो रोगन चला चुक कदी चे बरे कावानी चे बरेस. I was born in a small village in Amdo, Tibet, in the year 1974, July 14th. That was don't be too much to Oh, sorry. Yeah. That was July? October, correct. I'm sorry. I was born in October 17th,
October, what year?
1974. 34.
1974.
74.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Now, Mr. Dondup Wanchen, can you confirm that you left Tibet and arrived in San Francisco as an asylum seeker on the 25th of December 2017?
कुछ तो लोगों चला जो नितो चुपदेंगे दावा चुनी थे वो निश्चित नहीं निमा ये अमेरिका सैन फ्रांसिस्को जो बरवास Yes, Your Honor.
And you've since been granted asylum. Now you're residing in California, where you are appearing to this court on Zoom today. Is that correct?
아니 제 알려래 제는 접속 접주 드니 접속 접주라니 다차죠 대사디 캘리포니아 제 안데 샌프란시스코 제 대인지 청강나와 아니 세제 지야디 샌프란시스코네 슈가 바스 샌프란시스코 대사 지대응 아주 청강나 까지 시사디 아리그 공체 샌프란시스코를 바스 It's not inside San Francisco, the Bay Area in California.
All right, thank you. Mr. Dondup Wan Chen, I wish to just address briefly your previous testimony and public statements that you've made. Can you confirm that you've previously given testimony before the Congressional Executive Commission on China on the 14th of February 2018?
그저 그 완전히 제디 다다당 아주 장게 디 장고르라 아니 템셰페 바당 아니 봉미 제바당 두주 고라 지디 장 아리게 지소 나라 아니 디 템셰제바 디르와스 Would you please repeat the dates again?
14 February 2018.
네, 나와님이 제가 주주게 아니 니동 접절로 저기까지 시작을 왔어. Yes.
And you've also previously given a speech at the 2019 Geneva Summit, which is
아니 제네와게 자지 아니 지소 토쇼 나라 니동 주국으로 양제 네 당시 당시에 나버 왔어.
You were awarded the 2012 International Press Freedom Award, and there have been articles about that published online as well. Do you agree with that?
아니 제가 니동 중립으로 아니 자지게 생고바 송조제베 산속게 저 자가시 나도와스 데레베스. Yes, they.
And Your Honours, I've already mentioned that these appear at NFE2, pages 43 to 62. Now, in these earlier statements, you've spoken about your early activism. I want to take you through your history of activism to give a bit of context to the evidence that you'll be giving today.
장게 대한 디자까지 되는 나와라 즉 토마장 데 접속 랭구 나란 저제 니냠시 제레가 제버디 저름데 모토시 지역에 장모토 지역에 디지긴스 보기슈긴스.
All right. You said that in 1992 you went to India to see the Dalai Lama and to receive education. Is that right?
아니 장게 당시 나라 제베나 추동국자 국주권이로 아니 저 자가라 페이지에 저름 진제 데마세 니 자안을 로전 지역 탑시 제베 바스 데레베스
Point of clarification, if I may. When you said you were referring to a document, and if you do that, I'd like to be able to follow with you if you'll tell us what document you're
Yes.
referring to. Thank you.
I'm referring to the Congressional Executive Commission testimony that's given on pages 49 to 54 of NFE 2.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Right.
May I finish the interpretation, Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, that's right. I arrived in India, flew to India in 1992. I met His Holiness Dalai Lama, and although I didn't get a formal education at that time, because after a year I returned to Tibet in 1993.
When you returned to Tibet in 1993, you became involved in further activism. the interpreter, and that if Your Honours wish to see Mr Dundup on the screen, you will have to turn around.
Understood and acceptable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This issue might arise tomorrow for some other witnesses who are appearing on Zoom with interpretation. So perhaps later today I will try to see whether we can set up another computer so that Your Honours can also see the witness without having to turn around.
All right. Is this your last witness for today?
This is the last witness for today, Your Honour. Now, Mr Dundup, I'll just resume from where we left off.
구시던들 다당어서 다람니 양주 고츠기인스.
All right. 2008 was a significant year for the Tibetan human rights movement. Can you explain why it was so significant?
니동 제글로 권한을 로미기 톱당 예체의 링구 지자 첨부시 배우래 아니 디 가르치네 배우래 좀 지시 줘놨습니다.
我是当然做这个到底是我这个讲了后来他们这个的民众啊很少那讲了到底这个节目的在这里看了这个的马祖上班了到底这个今天你的题目就这个出就业的我们都有啥朋友啥男人有啥这个这个你这个的相关的但是呢讲了这个不属于的这个是什么
Yes, so 2008, we were shocked in Tibet because upon here, the Olympic game being given to China, and so our natural reaction was, what? How come this happened in China? And this kind of international events prestigious events should take place in the country where ruled by law and where people are equal and people have freedom and peace and prosperity. That's what the Olympic is all about. Represent means. But to our great astonish, and it gave it to China.
実際 IOC なジャノナ JRD アニグラムとかやきな JRD やきばやきの JRD そうあのジャノジョーナゴミとかでやきたんにキレンチームでそこでジャノジョーがオリンピックで JRD のチャーティーで中あれこのまたメンサマで一時まで覚えるがあれやき数値かがだって人事최종 목적이 중요한 자리죠.
So the IOC gave this opportunity to China, and because China promised, and they're going to improve the human rights, and however, we knew that China is going to use this as a great opportunity to carry out the campaign, the propaganda campaign, to show the world how happy Tibetans are inside Tibet and how prosperity and how everything is wonderful.
Now, what did you do as a result of your reaction to the Olympic Games being given to China?
So that's what they and judging the Olympic dance okay, Janala the Kupe the Tevere, and the Chetty Kuala Mundobi Lega Karichive Mas.
当时门都必须当时能力的这个开始做那个能力的主要的，但一旦我都开始这个只有是，他我们当地讲的不同没有那些，这个村里这样的然后的没有，他这个全部给你给这个就是啥，因为你上班当时没有估计这个经历，不能给没有给你当地，啊你这个不具体这个农业的这个嘛就是那个这个这个呢，那都是就你上去就给你的这个。
Because we knew what's actually going on in reality on the ground in the everyday life in Tibet. So therefore, several of us get together and we discussed that we have to show our our grievances, our position that is we are totally against these events taking place in China. And although I was charged in the crime to split the states, which was not the case. But I decided to take action to raise the voice and let the world know what China going to say or show, and everything is either a lie or it's twisted, and whatever the picture they painted, and it's twisted. And because in reality, give a small example, we even have no freedom to